Hi everyone, I am Cathleen Morano from grade 11 STEM A. Today, we will talk about the topic of is there learning continuity during COVID-19 pandemic? Continuity of learning is the continuation of education in the event of a prolonged school closure or student absence. It is a critical component of school emergency response measure as it promotes the continuation of teaching and learning and to ensure students can stay on their learning pathways despite circumstances that interrupt normal school attendance. COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in the physical closure of educational institutions throughout the world. But learning continues, albeit with a paradigm shift. As COVID-19 situation unfolds, school leaders and education policymakers are grappling with unprecedented decision in closing schools and having an equitable continuity of learning to protect students and the broader public. Educational sectors ought to plan for sustainable, quality, and flexible learning options. Interruptions to learning can take a variety of forms and may have wide-ranging impacts on the ability of education organizations to deliver learning services. In this context, school leaders must find ways to simplify the delivery of learning. In response, they are forced to find solutions to this crisis as early as possible, just to have a continuity of learning amidst the pandemic. In fact, different alternatives to school-based learning are emerging. Most of educators are turning to technology for solution. The purpose of this note is to have an amalgamation of findings from different sources or studies on learning continuity during COVID-19. This paper is an effort to execute a thematic literature review to reveal the evolution of learning paradigm over the years. These studies focus on immediate response phased in continuity of learning and teaching, as well as the interim capacity building phase that moved to online learning and teaching. Lastly, the sustainability phase. The findings will respond on the measure that ensures students in their learning journeys or pathways. Moreover, it also demonstrates the need to orient and modernize the school systems to meet students' individual needs. Finding sustainable, quality, and flexible learning options will help school weather such challenging conditions. When educators think about flexible learning, they inevitably think about technology to ensure students can stay on their learning pathways. Moving forward, there are research-based decisions that education systems and schools can and should be making now in relation to technology-enabled learning that will build resilience and sustainability in learning well into the future. While this is true, what these proponents fail to mention is that planning for student success in the wake of COVID-19 starts by recognizing that some students are particularly vulnerable when schools close. Additionally, there are current circumstances that will no doubt highlight nationwide issues of access and equity to technology, bandwidth, the skill set of educators, and ability of students across sectors to use technology for learning. Moreover, they fail to understand that this kind of continuity of learning will exacerbate existing inequities and further disadvantage to the poorest students. Policymakers should consider how they can make long-term investments to improve learning and teaching rather than pursuing short-term digital interventions that will only benefit a small minority of children. In this term, Educators must find ways to simplify the delivery of learning as well as those services that support diverse learners, families within the community, and district operations in a time of crisis. In the immediate present, schools are doing their best to give students access to resources for flexible learning. Complex demands of learning through the development of online, remote, and blended learning provision to ensure all students continue their learning journeys, and the disruptions caused by the pandemic don't exacerbate inequities. Even where devices are available and the internet is accessible to both students and teachers, still, schools are organizing the best available learning and teaching options. In spite of that, recent studies have identified that even when children have access to some form of educational technology, they may still lack access to learning continuity. Effort is required to ensure students can use devices for learning with the support of their families. I also believe that young people need to be provided with the skills, frameworks, and support to enable them to take ownership of their learning. The use of digital content in the teaching learning process gradually began shifting from erstwhile intermittent technology intervention, propagating thereby competency-based education, where both learning and evaluation would rely on predefined competencies and outcomes to foster high learning gains. However, an effective education response to the COVID-19 pandemic needs to be built on solid evidence and data. There is an existing questions to consider for those who are adopting learning continuity. First, do children use and actually learn from online learning platforms? Well, what students know and don't know is one of the key factors in this aspect. Since there is a lack of human interaction in this kind of education, students may learn less in this setup compared in the traditional way. Then, what are we learning about high-quality remote learning? What are the challenges of providing effective remote learning? What might a future blended model of education look like? A study said that many young people really enjoy online and remote learning. Leaders reported that it has increased engagement for some students. But this doesn't overlook the disproportionately affected by the most marginalized children, learners from the poorest households, families with low pre-existing levels of education, and students in remote areas. Children from less affluent communities appear to have low access to learning continuity. In Ecuador, survey findings suggest that learners from the lowest wealth quartile are more than twice as likely to have completed no schoolwork than learners from the highest wealth quartile. There needs to be a strategic direction and clear intent behind our use of technology for best outcomes. Many leaders identify this as a personal challenge. This method will serve as a driving force for you to progress, learn something new, and alter everything. Although online courses are not as effective as in-personal classes, they're still clearly preferable to none at all. With this design thinking approach inducted into the process of learning and development, ushering in thereby better engagement of the learners with the curriculum. Lastly, is there learning continuity during the COVID-19 pandemic? To answer that, yes, there is. However, again, a reliance on technology-supported education interventions could leave poorest students behind and widen existing inequalities. At the same time, learning continuity is not dependent on technology. Additionally, This does not mean that education providers can't use technology to support teaching and learning in the future. Yet, educators should be ready to recognize where children are along their individual trajectories and to provide appropriate learning experiences based on those competencies. As well as, they should also explore medium to long-term opportunities to use educational technology to build back better and to ensure we're better placed to respond to future crises. To conclude this, the COVID-19 pandemic has created a burning platform for schools and community in regard to the provision of learning outside of the classroom. All have risen to the challenge. A roundtable events is needed that provide leaders with the space and time to collectively influence each other and the system and became a powerful, positive voice for the change